Hey everybody, Jackless Painting here with a new video, and today we're doing an eBay rescue. Look at this Commissar. This guy is like first or second edition, super OG Commissar model. Found him for a steal. And as you can see, when I line him up next to this Space Marine captain, he kind of holds up. Like, he's a little bit taller than you would think for an old Rogue Trader or second edition mini, and I just love the look. He's so cartoony and different than what we normally see with models today that I fell in love with the model and I had to pick it up. I'm going to prime him in some of our Stynylrez black primer. I gave this guy a pretty good scrub with an steel wire brush just to clean off any errant bad primer that was on him when I got him. So he's still got a little bit of that primer on there, but I made sure to give him a nice scrub so he won't have any nasty textures or anything like that from the old primer. Also made sure to clean up any random pore gate sprue bits and any mold lines left over. It seems like every time I buy one of these metal models off of eBay, they come with some mold lines and some of those little pore gate stringy things. I don't know exactly what they're called, but I'm sure if you've ever worked with a GW metal model, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I had to clean some of those off and give them a good prime with the airbrush here. Okay, so we got him primed, and the first thing I want to do is work on his Commissar uniform. Got some dark blue and some dark neutral gray. I've mixed those up about 50-50 to make a very dark navy blue gray, and I'm going to lightly airbrush that over the whole model. We're doing sort of a color tinted black leather for his jacket and his hat here to get that iconic Commissar look. So I'm going to lightly spray that over the whole model. I don't want to blast the blue on there. I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be black. And we're going to build that up with the airbrush. So I've taken more of that dark neutral gray, sort of rinsed out the airbrush pot and mixed more gray into that so we can get more into a standard gray highlight for our black leather. And I'm going to lightly airbrush onto our details. You can see I'm picking out the tops of his shoulders, the areas of his little uniform jacket that poke out, things like that. And that's as bright as we're going to go for the time being with using the airbrush. So we still got to put a wash on this guy and kind of darken it back down to get some dynamic highlights for that leather. And then we're going to do his gloves. I want to do some white leather gloves, so I've got some of that dark neutral gray just by itself on the palette, and we're going to base coat our two gloves in that gray. Usually whenever I paint stuff that I want to be white, especially with a cool temperature white, I build it up through grays, and I almost never actually use pure white paint. And this creates a optical illusion so that when somebody looks at the model, they say, whoa, that's a really nice smooth white, but I didn't actually use any white paint. And so next we're going to pull out the light neutral gray, which you can see is a very light gray. And we're going to do a couple of thin coats on top of that dark neutral gray to start building up our white looking leather gloves. The last step is I'm going to do 50-50 of our light neutral gray and bold titanium white. So yeah, I'm using some white paint, but I'm not using pure white paint by itself, because we don't want to go up to pure white for this. We just want the illusion of a pure white. And this guy's pretty chunky, and he's a monocast model with a fairly open pose, so I decided to just airbrush this highlight, just being very careful, working pretty close to the model so I'm not spraying white paint onto our uniform there. And if I do get a little teensy bit of overspray, I can kind of clean that up with some water or just paint over it with a thinned out layer of black paint. And we're gonna do his boots now. He's got these cool sort of like armored but not armored, kind of cartoony looking boots, very reminiscent of older comic books like Judge Dredd and stuff like that that were very popular when this guy was being created. And I'm just going to hand base coat his boots, armor and all, in our dark blue, and then go into an airbrush highlight. So we're going to start with our airbrush highlight. I've got some pants blue. It's a really nice, vibrant primary blue. And I'm going to focus the center line of his boots. So I'm starting off with the knee pad, and then I kind of divide the boot in half down the center, and that's where I'm spraying my line. And with this middle color, I can be a little bit whiter, but I basically want the recesses and the sides of his boots to be that super dark navy dark blue. And I'm going to do that on both sides so that on the front and back where the light would be hitting it, it's going to be brighter, and then on the side it'll be super dark, and that's going to give us a really dynamic sort of OG comic book look. After that, I'm going to pull out some faded ultramarine. This is a nice sort of pastel baby blue color, and I'm very delicately going to highlight down that center line one more time, being very focused, working close in on the model and going over that center line one more time, and that's going to pop this color even more and give us that really nice sort of comic style to go along with this comic-y, cartoony style model. I think it's going to work really great together. Next, I'm going to pull out some burnt red. This is a nice dark burgundy red, and I'm going to base coat the ribbons of his medals and this little band that goes across the top of his cap. Those are going to be our accents of red on this guy. I know that the Commissars have a lot of red, like their typical color scheme is black and red, but I wanted to do something a little different with this guy because he is sort of from a bygone era of the look for a Commissar. So he's going to have the black and red, but our primary colors are going to be black, blue, and white instead. And then I'm going to highlight that red a little bit with the bold Pyrrole red, very bright fire engine red here. Just a couple of thin coats to brighten up that red, make it really vibrant, so that when we put a wash on the model, they still look like a nice primary blood red color. Now we're going to focus on the face. I've got some shadow flesh, which is going to be our base color for his little face. And I think this is where the majority of the character on this model is. He's got only about half of his face showing, and it's peeking out from this very high collar that he's got sculpted. And it's almost Looney Tunes. Like, I'm almost getting like a Marvin the Martian look, or like an old like Elmer Fudd look from this model. And I think that's what kind of caught my attention, is that it is so cartoony, and we're used to working with models in 40K that are just like super serious and grimdark all of the time, that this cartoony look is almost like a breath of fresh air and lets me do a lot of really fun stuff with this guy. After that, I'm going to pull out some tan flesh, and we're going to highlight that skin. I'm being fairly light and thin with this paint because I don't want to blast out the darker shadow flesh that's in the details. So I'm taking my time and making sure that in the deepest recesses of his face sculpt that we have some of that shadow flesh peeking through, so that we get those details clearly visible after the wash. And we're going to do all of his medals and buttons in bright gold. I could start a little bit darker like I normally do for 40K models, but this guy is supposed to be a Commissar, and what kind of Commissar goes into battle without pristine polished buttons and medals. So we're doing a really, really bright gold. You can see I'm just focusing the belt buckle, the buttons on his jacket, and these little skull pips that are on his collar and cap. After that, we're going to pull out dark silver. This is a great dark gunmetal color, and we're going to paint his guns in that. So I'm just going to base coat his little firearm here and his sidearm, as well as the chain that's going across his shoulder blades. But after that, we're going to pull out an even brighter metal to do that chain so that it reads as a different material than the guns. We're going to keep the guns dark and military, but that chain polished and parade. And for the chain, we're going to use regular silver, and this is a very bright and shiny silver, so it's going to give us that sort of ornamental look for this chain. And I'm just going to lightly base coat over that chain one more time, trying not to just flood this area of detail with the silver. I'm going to leave those deep recesses in the chain detail nice and dark, so that even after a wash, we have a really dynamic look. And then before the wash, I'm going to seal this guy with a coat of matte varnish through the airbrush. Just taking my time, not putting it on too thick in any one area. If you're using varnish through the airbrush and you see a part of the model start reflecting shiny with wetness, that means move on to a different part, because we don't want to pool that varnish. And for the wash, we're going to use this Mr. Weathering Color Multi-Black and solvent that goes along with it. Not only is this a really cool oil wash product, but it also dries really quickly, and it's going to give us that sort of bold black line art look that goes along with the kind of cartooniness of this model. The tech here is just to dip your brush in the solvent and paint a thin coat of that all over the model, and then come back with your brush loaded up with the multi-black and do an all over wash. And it will be kind of heavily stained and spotty, but the cool thing is that you can get a clean brush or a Q-tip or something like that, dip that into the solvent, and then go back over the areas and just clean that up. So it's going to dilute it and wick it away from the model, and if you have any stained areas where it starts to dry, it'll just rub that off super clean and create that iconic oil wash type blend of washing and shading, but without the hassle of having to mix that oil wash with mineral spirits and then wait like 24 hours for it to fully cure and all that stuff. So like this is, you know, 5 to 10 minutes of dry time once you're done. Super easy, and it gets us exactly the type of look that we want. And so here he is after that oil wash has dried up. You can see he is looking really good for an eBay rescue. Like no model in the late 80s, early 90s when this model came out looked this good. So we've got this OG model with modern paint tech, looking dope, ready for the table. I am going to take him up another couple of notches by doing some detail work on Twitch, so make sure to check that out, and I'll catch you next time.